A small, isolated farmstead in rural Germany, 6 people brutally murdered with no apparent motive, and a killer who managed to evade justice for nearly a century. Welcome to the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. It's April 1, 1922 and the Gruber family has gone oddly quiet. The next morning, 2 brothers, Hans and Eduard Scharovsky, went to the Gruber farm to sell coffee, only to find silence and no one answering the door. The brothers walked around but they didn't see anyone. They only noticed that the machine room gate was wide open. The Gruber farm would typically be buzzing with work at that time, but it was eerily silent. Meanwhile, Lorenz Schlittenbauer was wondering where his neighbors were. He decided to head over with 2 other neighbors. When they arrived, they found the Gruber family brutally murdered. It was 4 days after the murder had happened. The police were immediately called to the scene, and what they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. Andreas Gruber was the patriarch of the family. He was 63 and had been married to his wife Kazilia for 16 years. Victoria was their widowed daughter and she had 2 children, Kazilia and Joseph. The Gruber family had a somewhat tumultuous history. Andreas had been married twice and had a reputation for being a difficult person. He was known to be quick-tempered and had been in trouble with the law in the past. Kazilia, on the other hand, was known to be kind and hardworking. Despite their isolation, the family was known to be friendly with their neighbors and often attended church together on Sundays. The Gruber family and their farm may seem idyllic, but as we'll see in the next part of our story, their peaceful existence was shattered by a horrific crime that remains unsolved to this day. Initial investigations were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene and moved bodies and items around. A mattock was the most likely murder weapon, though the weapon itself was not at the scene. The reports from the family's autopsies showed that the younger Kazilia had been alive for several hours after the assault. She had also torn her hair out lying in the straw. Andreas was all in blood, his cheekbones were sticking out. The elder Kazilia and Victoria were left with a cracked skulls. Little Joseph and the maid met a similar fate in the farmhouse. Chillingly, the farm animals and Pomeranian watchdog remained unharmed and they had even been taken care of and fed in the several days that passed between the murders and their terrible discovery. Let's take a closer look at some of the possible suspects and their motives. Besides the murder, nothing had been disturbed. The killer even remained in the house for several days after the murder, feeding the livestock, taking care of the house, eating meals and lighting fires in the hearth. There were several leading suspects and theories. One of them was Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, theorized that he came back from the war and killed them, but that theory didn't last long because they soon discovered that Karl had been reported slain in France almost a decade before, but his body was never found. Andreas was also considered a potential suspect in the murders. He was known to be an abusive and controlling. Andreas had reportedly threatened to kill his wife and daughter in the past, and may have seen them as possessions rather than family members. Some speculate that Kazilia and Victoria may have plotted to kill him in order to escape his tyranny. Andreas' own death, however, remains mysterious. He was found dead alongside the other victims, and there were no signs of self-inflicted wounds or struggle. However, there are also reasons to believe that Kazilia and Victoria may not have been the killers. For one, the sheer brutality of the murders, including the fact that the killer stayed in the house for several days after the crime, suggest that the killer may have been someone with a much deeper motive than simply escaping an abusive situation. After all of the other theories were tossed out, there was one that was standing out from the others. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor, was known to have had a somewhat strange personality. Some reports suggest that he was a loner who had a reputation for being strange and unfriendly. In 1918, Lorenz's first wife died and rumors circulated that he may have had an affair with Gruber's daughter, Victoria, and that her child Joseph is actually from Lorenz. But 2-year-old Joseph was rumored to be the son of Victoria and her father Andreas, who had an incestuous relationship that was documented in court and known in the village, so it isn't clear if Lorenz was the father of Joseph. In 1921, Schlittenbauer marries his second wife. Just 2 days prior to the murder, their first daughter dies. There were also several suspicious actions. When Schlittenbauer and his friends arrived to investigate, they had to break a gate to enter the barn because all of the doors were locked. However, immediately after finding the 4 bodies in the barn, Schlittenbauer apparently unlocked the front door with a key and entered the house alone. His friends stated that he was viewing and handling the bodies without signs of repulsion. He also knew his way around. According to reports in the files for the case, local discovered Schlittenbauer visiting the remains of the demolished Hinterkaifeck in 1925. Upon being asked why he was there, Schlittenbauer stated that the perpetrator's attempt to bury the family's remains in the barn had been hindered by the frozen ground. This was seen as indicating knowledge of details that only the killer would know and evidence that Schlittenbauer had intimate knowledge of the conditions of the ground at the time of the murders. Another speculation was that Schlittenbauer murdered the family because he was traumatized by the death of his own child, and in addition to that, Victoria demanded financial support for young Joseph, and even Jakob Sigel, one of his friends with whom Lorenz arrived to investigate, called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. But over the years, Schlittenbauer conducted and won several civil claims for slander against persons who described him as the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Although there were more than 100 suspects over the years, it remains a mystery to this day who murdered the family and what was his motive. The family had lots of money, and one of the motives could have been to gain the family's fortunes and lands, but the brutality of the murders suggests that it was something different: the money, something we will never know. Though in 2007 the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy took the Hinterkaifeck murders on as a cold case, they were unable to conclusively identify the murderer, though they did all independently agree on a theory. However, that theory remains a secret. In 1923, the farm was demolished, and the family now lays buried along with its 100-years-old mystery. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed it.